Hello and welcome to ETAuto Big Bite, a show that brings to you top industry leaders and experts. Today we are joined by Mr. James Newcomb, Managing Director, Rocky Mountain Institute. Rocky Mountain Institute has been working very closely with the Government of India and NITI Aayog. They brought in India Leaps Ahead report also, and they have also been advising government on various mobility solutions. Welcome to ETAuto Big Bite, Mr. Newcomb. It's a pleasure having you here.
Press the bell icon and never miss an update from ETAuto.
Can you please share with us how do you read the Indian mobility landscape and how do you see the transformation to take place? Do you think we are moving in the right direction as you have been advising the government for a long time?
Well, this is an important time with FAME 2 on the table. It's been long awaited and much welcomed, I think, both by the industry and at large to see a clear signal of where the government wants to go. This is a moment when the government has played its card, and there are other moves to be made by the industry and by corporations and other leaders that will shape India's mobility future. So it's a moment when India's mobility landscape is changing, not only internally because of leadership from the government, but also by force of change in the global landscape of technology and competition.
We have been hearing from the corporate side that mandating one particular technology, which is electric vehicle, to reduce CO2 emission is not fair. Rather, government should look into the ultimate result, which is reduction of pollution or CO2, or bringing down the cost or the import bill that we get from fuel import. So how do you read into this?
Yeah, there's certainly a role for a wide range of technologies in a set of what may be opportunistic niches in this country and around the world. But the dominant platform, in our view, will be electric. The electric drivetrain systems around the world are advancing. It's the suite of technologies, rapid advances in battery technology and the integration of those systems. That's really a global phenomenon, and it's hard to see that India could go any other way than to ride the wave of that transition. It's a moment when India can get on the front foot rather than the back foot in making that transition.
You're talking about EV being one of the main technology when we move towards our goal of reducing CO2. But if you look at the FAME 2 in this context, it is more of a technology oriented. It doesn't talk about other opportunities like fuel cells or other options that India can explore.
I think that's an appropriate approach, actually, given the significance of what's happening in the electricity space. It's difficult to try to straddle multiple technologies and be able to do that successfully. And if we look at the leading markets around the world, if we look at the pace of advance, and in particular at the efficiency of the electric platforms, we think they're likely to prevail in the long term.
But looking at India, the country has most of its electricity generation from fossil fuel. In such a scenario, how do you contain the pollution that is the larger goal with only just electrification? And we do not have, of the 7 main raw materials, we hardly have 2 or 3 of them: manganese, graphite and aluminium. We do not have lithium ion, we do not have cobalt, we do not have nickel. So how do you see this progressing?
Yeah, let's take those 2 issues apart, because the electricity supply issue is one in which we can see already that India's renewable resources are abundant and they'll be among the lowest cost in the world. The solar plus batteries combination, bringing in wind into that resource base, we can certainly see a transition to a high renewable electricity system in India's future, one that will actually be balanced by having more electric vehicles plugged into that grid that gives it greater flexibility. So there's a lot of opportunity there for a transition that brings not only a cleaner grid, but a significantly lower risk grid from the perspective of price risk. And that's important. It means that India is weaning itself from oil imports, from the trade deficit implications of those imports, and from the risk of price shocks and national security concerns.
How do you see the outlay of rupees 10,000 crore, which is a huge amount if you look at the earlier discussed amount that we thought the government is going to release for FAME 2? Do you think now the buck stops at the companies or the manufacturers' end? And in that, what kind of challenges do you see?
In a sense, it's certainly a large amount of money from the government's perspective. From the perspective of the size of the domestic industry and its future, it's not such a big number. So, as you suggest, a lot of the action will depend on taking a leadership signal from the government, but the degree of follow-up that actually happens in the hands of the auto companies themselves. I think most of them are looking at the same competitive landscape. They're looking at how fast the technology sets are changing. They're looking at emerging new battery chemistries for which India may be better positioned to compete than it is in lithium ion. So there's a transitional pathway here to ride the wave of cost reduction in lithium ion in the next maybe 5 to 7 years, but laying the groundwork for domestically produced alternative chemistries. Some of those have the opportunity to be radically cheaper. The bill of materials for some of the best state-of-the-art solid-state chemistries is on the order of 20% of the cost of lithium-ion chemistries with a simpler manufacturing technology. So you could see batteries that are less than half the cost of lithium-ion, and that in itself is both an opening for India and a driver of new electric systems across the board, from buses to micro-mobility to scooters to electric vehicles of all types, really.
If you look at Indian economy or Indian governance, here we see that we have more inclination towards social topics or social issues. We are not economically that sound that we can afford to let go huge amount of subsidies for any sector. Even in that condition, government has taken out 10,000 crore for that. It's certainly an important step from the government side. If you look at the corporate side, the manufacturer side, do you think they are equipped or capable enough to contribute from their side to speed up the EV mission in India?
Yeah, I think we'll see the kind of risk capital that India needs to build manufacturing capacity to meet this transition. There's no question that the biggest companies in the world are aware of the potential size of India's market. It's the fastest growing big economy in the world. So the demand pull from this economy is one that will justify investments here. I think that's a tremendous force that India can use to its benefit. If you compare India's strategy that's likely to be successful to those of Norway or Germany that have driven high-cost subsidies as a way to lead the market, or China that's done a top-down model of largely government directives, India has the opportunity to do much more of a bottom-up market-led transition with new business models for electric mobility services, with a lot of innovation across the country. It's really, and enough capital coming in to support that transition.
So talking about India is likely to adopt swappable model. How effective do you see if we go segment-wise, like two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, and bus and trucks? Where do you see the likely applicability of this model in India?
Yeah, well, I think the FAME program's on the right track because it's put the emphasis on shared service vehicles. That means the highest mileage vehicles, the ones for which electric drivetrain is going to have an inherent cost advantage and for which the customer exposure is the greatest. So the two and three wheelers are going to go pretty fast in our view and driven by economics, coming quickly to price points that are attractive not only for the average man in the street, the average customer, but increasingly, to those who are upgrading from other forms of transportation that they're using today. So the two and three wheelers is a really promising way to make a fast transition and to maintain high density on the roads, because the hidden cost to India's society and its economy is congestion. So maintaining high shares for these alternative modes and maintaining high shares for of shared electric buses and other public transportation is really important.
So you talked about two-wheeler, three-wheeler will be the fastest to adopt electrification. Can you put a number in terms of percentage and a timeline that you expect? Because you have done some kind of research around it.
Yeah, we've built a lot of scenarios, and I think it's important to underscore that the opportunity space for India is pretty wide right now. We spoke about how much the speed of this transition will depend on the commitments by the key corporates that will follow the government's policy.
What's your assessment in terms of percentage?
Yeah, I think we can see, a third of the two and three wheelers in the next 3 to 5 years, easily. Potentially a faster transition than that. It obviously depends on the pace that the manufacturers make adoption, of new technology.
How difficult it is going to achieve 30% electrification of the entire automobile fleet that we are going to sell after 2030?
It's hard. It's going to take some time.
It's not going to be 2030.
Yeah, I think the four-wheeler market is going to be the longest and slowest, but it's also the fundamental opportunity by shifting to access this very rapidly growing segment of the transportation network companies.
One last and final question.
See things go fast.
Yeah, one last and final question. Do you think swappable is the best option for India?
I think swappable will have its niche where it will compete. It's hard to say that one can standardize in such a rapidly evolving ecosystem. So I'm skeptical that there's an easy solution there, but standardizing a common battery platform and opening for mass purchasing of those types of batteries is certainly an attractive option.
Thank you so much for talking to ETAuto. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.